Okay, this is an addendum to the carnality video. It's called Patchwork Carnality because after a lot of examination of Bible and then people playing out the Bible doctrines, I realized that there's a certain pattern. It goes like this. Whatever you are personally negative to in the truth, in other words, there's a particular truth that you're negative to, what you'll do is you'll immediately go carnal when confronted with that particular truth. And if you're really entrenched in the carnality, really negative to that particular truth, you will actually get to the point where you reverse the truth when you actually see it, whether you see it in the text of the Bible or you see it in your own life. Okay? And it's very specific. For example, and I'm going to make a lot of examples from well-known things, but bear in mind that each one of us has the same problem with respect to our own negativities. You know, some really popularly well-known negativities and patchwork carnality is with respect to certain denominations. For example, Romans 9 completely refutes Calvinism, yet the Calvinists tout it as proving their point. They are so negative to the truth about the fact that man is given by God free will that his sin didn't destroy. In other words, Adam's free will went right on and stupidly after he sinned, because it wasn't his free will that was depraved, it was his knowledge. That fact in the Bible is completely reversed by Calvinists because they're negative to the idea. They're negative to the Bible truth on this. The rest of us who know that free will, man goes to hell because of his own free will, the rest of us see it very plainly what's wrong with the Calvinists on this. And we see it very plainly in Romans 9, especially in the verses that they like to quote from about Romans 9:18 forward. Paul is refuting the straw man who says that, you know, God did it to him, he had no control over his own will. Paul's refuting that very ably in Romans 9. But the Calvinist thinks that it supports him. Okay, that's an example of patchwork carnality. So when the Calvinist sees Romans 9, which refutes Calvinism, he thinks it supports. He reverses the meaning of the Bible, which means at that point he is so negative that you can't talk to him. If he can't see the plain refutation in the Bible verses he's using to support himself, then he's not going to hear you either. So he's carnal at that point. So he might, and this is really important to understand, because using still the Calvinists as the example, they get a lot of ideas in the Bible correct. Like they get Trinity mostly correct, some parts of it they get wrong. They get, you know, the idea that it's faith alone and Christ alone, although they get part of that wrong too. You know, where they get it wrong is where they go carnal. And therefore the Bible's correction they don't see. And the part that they get right, well, they're not anti that part of the truth. So it's a patchwork carnality. The part they're not anti to, they can correctly read. And the part that they're anti to, they can't correctly read. You know, and I don't want the Calvinists to be the poster boy here, but they're a good poster boy because we all know their doctrines. The Catholics, it's the same way with respect to Matthew 16:18. Matthew 16:18 completely refutes popes. Completely. All right? But because they played games with it in the Vulgate, they actually invented a Latin word to mask the Greek, so that you know, the Greek says that epitate te petre. Christ is the head. Christ, the church is built on Christ. There are no popes because Christ is the head. All right? The Greek itself tells you that. But the Catholic uses the very verse that refutes him to claim that there are popes and that Peter is one, even though the Bible tells you Peter was never in Rome. Peter was in Babylon. That's where he died. That's at the end of 1 Peter. So, I mean, clear verses that refute a particular denomination's tenets are actually used by that denomination when it's too far gone, when it's too carnal. They use a verse that refutes them to support themselves. That's how blind they are. All right, so Catholicism has its own problems, and we all are, familiar with that. The same thing can be said for SDA, pro-life, the oneness people. I heard a guy who believes that God is only one person actually quote John 17 to support his position. Okay, but any normal person reading John 17 would know that Christ isn't praying to himself. Okay, so that's a Trinity passage, John 17, a whole chapter. Christ is not praying to himself. And that also, of course, refutes all the people who think that Christ is not God either. Okay, because he's talking about himself as equal to God. All right? So he's praying to somebody other than himself, and he's calling himself equal to this other person. So clearly that all the people who believe God is one person, they turn carnal when they read John 17. All right? And all the people who believe that Christ isn't God, they turn carnal when they read John 17. Of course, even the devil advertises that Christ is God in Matthew 4. Those temptations wouldn't mean anything if Christ wasn't God, because you have to be able to be God to do those, to give in to those temptations. So that's what patchwork carnality is. Whatever particular truth, especially in the Bible, that you're negative to, you immediately become carnal when you're confronted with that doctrine. Now, you might use 1 John 1:9 later, or, and therefore you can read Bible on what you're positive to. The same thing is true in life. Whatever doctrine you're negative to, whatever truth you're negative to, if you're really, really too far gone, you're going to reverse the evidence against you to say that it supports you, like the Calvinists do, like the Catholics do, like the SDA do, like the oneness people do.